Okay, so I want to thank everybody for making this meeting today. This is actually, just as a quick background, we call this the Data Geeks meeting. We've been meeting for years now, every Thursday, with there's two main groups of people who have kind of stuck with us throughout the years. One is up in the Bay Area. The prime group we work with up there is the Benicia Community Air Monitoring Program. And they run a community-based air monitoring station in the city of Benicia, California, and have for years. And then the other people that we spend a lot of time with is actually some Patty. Patty, how do you pronounce your last name? I'm sorry.
It's Glick.
Glick.
Weird, but yeah, not the way it's spelled.
Okay, so Patty Glick is actually lives in Porter Ranch, Los Angeles, and is one of the founding members of the Aliso Moms Alliance. So they got involved because we put together an air monitoring network for the community of Porter Ranch and have been operating it for a number of years now. And again, we meet every Thursday, 8 o'clock. Happy to have people join us for this. And like I said, what we're going to do today is really focus on, what is currently happening down in Los Angeles, which is we've got what we're now kind of calling these urban wildfires. We're joined by some amazing people here. Jochen Stutz is one of we're running his air monitoring systems in Porter Ranch. He's with UCLA School of Atmospheric Science. Mike Jerrett is Mike, what are you down in the world of UCLA?
I'm a professor in environmental health science, and I'm the Jonathan Fielding Chair in Climate Change and Public Health.
And Mike is actually leading the health study down at Porter Ranch right now, as part of, he's looking at the impacts of the Aliso Canyon gas blowout that occurred, a while back, and understanding how that event actually impacted the community's public health. Again, I did mention that Brent Olive is with us. He's an industrial hygienist at the University of North Alabama. And again, Brent has been working with us for years, in different capacities. And then finally, the fourth person that we want to kind of bring in this is Eric Stevenson. Eric works for Argos, but used to be the head of measurements, if I got that right, for the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. And why that's specifically relevant for this conversation is he was also kind of one of the lead people who did air monitoring during the urban wildfires associated with the Santa Rosa fire in, about 5-6 years ago. So these guys together are, in my opinion, the best of the best as far as it gets into research and understanding what are the hazards associated with an event like this, and what kind of precautions may or may not, are most relevant for protecting the community and the workers. Also, I mean, the thing that does make this unique is the fact that a number of the people, we're going to be presenting and talking today are actually direct impact of what's going on down in Los Angeles right now. Specifically, and I'd actually, Jochen, if you could actually talk about what's your current situation and how are the LA fires impacting you personally?
Well, my house is in the middle of the Palisades fire. It's still standing. We're in a bubble of, I would say, quarter-mile radius maybe, with a bunch of old condo complexes and so on, and they didn't burn. We were actually, because we were upwind of the ignition zone, we actually didn't burn on Tuesday, our area. That was actually pretty clean. But then on Wednesday there were fires around, and there's some whole bunch of homes around us that burned, and we basically got evacuated since Tuesday. I actually was in the Pacific Palisades about an hour after the fire started, and so I kind of saw the fire come over the hill and then also evacuated. So yeah, so I mean, for us, we're kind of staying with family in the valley, so we're pretty well aware of what's going on and keep following out of personal interest.
And I guess, Jochen, it's you guys, at least it's coming across to me, you're a little bit quiet, so you might want to speak up a bit.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
There you go. Beautiful. So, given the fact that this is such a unique experience. I mean, normally as professionals in what we do, we're watching things from afar. We're obviously very concerned about what are going on, but to have people we work with directly impacted is such a unique and I wish everybody down in Los Angeles the best. One of the reasons I think this discussion is so relevant is, the reality of the situation is this kind of a issue is going to happen again. It's inevitable. It may not be, right now, probably the areas that have been affected are, the very unlikely lightning won't strike twice in the same place just because there isn't tool to actually get on fire. But, all sorts of places, are really at risk. So we want to, and I'm going to kind of move on to, asking, Mike Jerrett to kind of present some, his background as being in public health, and really I'd like to get his insights on, from Mike's perspective, given the fact that this is actually an ongoing situation. It's not like the fires are out. From a community perspective, Mike, what do you think are the immediate impacts or concerns about public health? And then how do you see this kind of laying out for the future?
Yeah, there are several major concerns for public health right now. Clearly, for all the people like Jochen that have experienced, evacuation trauma, many people that go through that experience are going to have post-traumatic stress disorder, heightened levels of anxiety and depression. And the studies that have been done up around Fort McMurray in Canada show that can go on for 2 to 3 years after the event, perhaps longer. So there's that aspect of it for the people that are most directly affected. And then the second major concern is the release of very complex and poorly understood air pollutant mixtures. So these are having regional effects. Certainly the people that are closer are probably getting more of the heightened toxicity because they were close to burning structures, which have all kinds of potential with plastics and metals to enhance the particles with metals or with PAHs. So that's a big concern. But I think regionally, there's been a lot of confusion about if we see that our purple air monitors or our air now are showing that it's okay. We're in the green zone for the conventional air quality index. The problem is that we just don't have monitors that are going to get at what we really need, and that's the from a regional perspective, the secondary formation of particles that can be highly toxic, the aromatics and the aldehydes, formaldehyde and benzene being two of the key ones from a health perspective, that can really have a wide array of health effects, ranging from respiratory distress to cancer formation over the longer term. And then, longer term, what we don't have any good studies, I don't think, that look at what the impacts are of repeated wildfire exposures, where this is becoming the new normal, on the development of chronic diseases. So, if we assume that it's really about the dose, and it doesn't matter whether you get dosed with very peaky, relatively infrequent doses compared to something that's ongoing, like living beside a major highway. If we assume that dosing regime doesn't matter, what we're seeing is that every zip code in California and every year is having, some wildfire smoke influence its exposure profile. So we know from many studies of PM and ozone and nitrogen oxides, and a few on volatile organic compounds, that long-term, sustained exposure or repeated exposures can elicit serious heart disease. So, effectively leading to atherosclerosis, which underlies a lot of the strokes and heart attacks that people have, development of asthma and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, diabetes, and there's a larger and growing literature now showing that there are mental health problems. It affects the functioning of the brain when there's inflammation, or when the particles are very small. They can enter through our lungs into our bloodstream, and once they're part of the circulation, they can deliver toxics directly to the brain. So there's certainly growing, maybe not completely conclusive evidence that it is affecting mental health. And then, as we get into sort of the tail end of the life course, that there's growing evidence that it affects dementia. So we don't know anything about this. There was one study that just came out in December of last year that looked at elevated dementia in relation to air pollution exposures. It's one of the few high quality ones that's out there. It was based on the Kaiser Permanente health system records. But we really don't know what the impacts are long term, I would say. And that's a big concern given the magnitude of exposure. And if we go to the other end of the life spectrum, mothers that are pregnant during these events, there is some evidence that they're more likely to have low birth weight babies or deliver preterm, both of which can have, sustained effects for the life course. Some of the babies recover and they're fine, but some don't, and that leads to a higher risk for chronic diseases as they progress into adolescence and adulthood. So, I think the most pressing things right now are to try to better understand what the exposures are, and to get out there and get those samples, to get some, rapid response health questionnaires, and, for people that have evacuated, but also for those that were not as directly affected. So we have comparison groups, and then, to get some baseline biological samples. And Jochen and you and I were talking about this yesterday, that there are some people that didn't evacuate, and they might be a good group to go and get some samples from if they're willing to give us their blood, and store that so for future research purposes, so we at least have the baseline. But if we had the funding, we could do a lot more, in getting this rolling very quickly. And then, as we're evolving into a phase maybe in the next couple of months where people like Jochen, whose houses are still standing, want to go home, a critical concern there is how to remediate these houses that have been heavily penetrated by smoke. And that's something that, you know, the Industrial Hygiene Association of America has some guidelines on that. But we don't, it's a little bit of a wild west out there. There are a lot of companies that will say they'll come and clean up. Whether they're doing it scientifically is questionable. So, you know, for people going back into their homes, it really needs to be someone with high level industrial hygiene or indoor air quality assessment skills to go in and properly remediate the home. And in some cases, that's going to mean, you know, almost gutting it and taking out all the drywall, because a lot of the particles will adhere to surfaces, and they'll get into the attic and the rafters. So it's very hard to get it out just with normal cleaning processes. And of course, there's a raft of occupational health issues that also come with these fires. From a personal perspective, my son's a wildland firefighter, a hotshot up in the Klamath River region. And I was talking to Eric Stevenson yesterday when he said, you know, they were getting pretty high benzene levels of the fires in Santa Rosa, and, you know, well above normal and, you know, above WEHA standards. That's certainly a concern for the people that are up close in these fires. But then for the people that go in and have to do the remediations, they have to be well trained and wearing personal protective equipment that's up to the task. And that means they've got to have, you know, full vapor plus particle protection respirators and proper gear. Sorry, I'm getting over a bit of a flu, but my voice isn't good. But that's just a summary of what I see as, you know, some of the major issues right now.
And just quickly, as an administrative thing, if anybody has questions or wants follow-up information, if you want to just put that into the chat, we'll address all of that and send, you know, we're going to send this, you know, we're going to make this recording public, but we'll also send out any answers to any questions or comments and concerns you might have. But, you know, feel free to just put any comment like that into the chat. We'll take care of it.
Just one rejoinder, Don, that, you know, I think societally, we've really underestimated the magnitude of this problem. And, you know, we did some health impact assessment work that was just published last year in Science Advances that basically shows if you know, do some mathematical manipulations, as I said, we don't have a long-term health impact, say on mortality from wildfires is directly assessed, but we did some reasonable manipulations in integrating wildfire short-term effects with long-term effects from undifferentiated PM that we've studied extensively. And our estimates show that it's about 54,000 people in an 11-year period from 2009 to 2018 that likely died as a result of wildfire smoke exposure, with an estimated, you know, economic impact of more than $430 billion. So, you know, when you look at the amount of money that's been put into prevention, to forest management, and to, you know, you can't just say to homeowners, create defensive space, harden up your structure, change your roof. You need to give them subsidies. You need to give them the expertise to do that. There has to be a program, just like we've had to, you know, incentivize solar or electric vehicles. There has to be something there to help the homeowners. So we've really underinvested, and now we're seeing, unfortunately, the results of that underinvestment.
I could personally attest to the fact that while you guys were dealing with these issues in Los Angeles, you know, I live up in Washington State, but you know, right next to Oregon, and over the weekend I actually got a letter from the state of Oregon saying that my house up in Bend, Oregon is in a high fire zone area and deal with it. It's kind of that's all they said.
Yeah.
This was just deal with it. And I'm sure my insurance company got that letter too, and they're going to be dealing with me personally on this as well. Just quickly, what about, what could, just for the general public, what are the current, what would be the things that, you know, if you just look at, for example, the EPA's air quality index and it says it's good. I guess the question is kind of a two-part. What's the difference between hazards associated with an urban wildfire and a traditional wildfire? And do the current indexes actually, you know, are they good enough to just, if it says all is green, is that going to be good enough given what is currently happening right now? And again, these are just your insights. This is not official guidance.
Yeah. So, I mean, the air quality index deals with 6 so-called criteria pollutants, like particulate matter, ozone, nitrogen oxide, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, and there's a 6th one, lead. So it's a integrated measure that during a wildfire, it's going to largely be driven by the particulate matter. As these plumes age and they put off precursors to ozone, there's also the possibility of having an increase in ozone, but that tends to happen far away from the fire sites in our estimates. So when we look at the air quality index, it's assuming that, you know, if you have a certain particle load, that is going to, based on mass, that there's equal toxicity among the particles, or roughly equal toxicity. The concern with the wildfire smoke is that there are many substances, the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, the volatile organic compounds, broadly known as air toxics, that can adhere to the particles. So you're actually kind of supercharging the toxicity of the particles, potentially. And there's not a lot that's known about this, but that is a concern. So you could look at it and the air quality index would say particles are low, but if the particles are 10 times more toxic than they are normally, that would be a concern. Another issue with the air quality index is that it really doesn't capture a lot of the health concerns that come out of these fires that are related to the VOCs. So we know when these plumes get older and they age and the wind speed slows down, you're going to get the formation of formaldehyde, which is a group 1 carcinogen and a serious respiratory irritant. So that's not being measured at all in the air quality index. And then I think what a lot of people don't realize is that the fires often contain precursors. I do have some slides if I could share them. Maybe that
Yeah,
will help.
I'll go ahead and make you a co-host, and that will allow you to.
Yeah, so you know, there's going to be secondary formation that can lead to particle formation that's considerably downwind. And, you know, Jochen knows much more about this than most people. But let me see here. Sorry, maybe don't have the right slide here. Yeah, so can you see the slide?
Can you make it a little bit larger?
So, I mean, this is typically what we get, the mix, you know, it's coming off. It's a very complex mixture. And honestly, the evidence on the toxicology for air pollution in wildfires is much weaker than it is for other sources. But we do know that you've got all these hydrocarbons, nitrogen oxides. These are ozone precursors. So downwind of the fires, you could get elevated ozone. You've got these secondary particles, and then you've got black and brown carbon coming directly off. So many of these pollutants are formed downwind of the fire, and you might not see smoke and you might not realize that you're in an area that could have elevated levels of pollution. Now, these secondary particles will get picked up, but then a lot of the VOCs and that are precursors to hydrocarbons will not. So, you know, that's a concern. So when people, you know, I guess one way to think about this is that it's, you know, if the key component of it's driving air quality in urban areas is the, you know, it's the emissions, but it's also the dilution in the atmosphere. There is an argument to be made that you know, if the air quality index is low, that a lot of these other constituents of the wildfire are probably going to be low too, because it's indicative of better dispersion. But if they are operating at different spatial and temporal scales, particularly for these secondary organic aerosols and the VOCs, it may not be captured in the air quality index. So I just wanted to quickly, I mean, this is maybe, but just for those that are, you know, this is basically what's happening when the particles are entering into our respiratory system, triggering autonomic nervous system responses that can lead to changes in our heart rate, arrhythmias, blood pressure. There's a respiratory system response that has inflammatory mediators, and it can spill over into other organ systems in the vasculature. So this is why we see it affecting the heart and diabetes. And then the cardiovascular system over the long term, it can elicit atherosclerosis, changes in the endothelial, so those cells on the outside of, the inside of the vessels. And then when it's very small particles, and there are some studies that show that wildfire smoke is probably got a fairly big component of ultrafine particles. These can translocate through the respiratory system, and then they go into the bloodstream, and they begin to interfere with the healthy exchange of oxygen to the bloodstream, but they also can deliver toxics, and then you're into every organ system in the body.
And we'll share any of these slides that are there. I just one quick Assad basically has kind of presented a question of, can you elaborate on the long-term health effects? And it may be somewhat, you may have already covered this, but you know, and this is kind of what you see, people who inhaled the smoke right now and aren't wearing these masks. And I guess this is one question is, are the traditional masks adequate, you know, for example, for a first responder or someone who's helping the first responders, will that be adequate protection will it filter out some of the pollutants that may be occurring now?
Well, if it's the N95 mask, it will filter out a large portion of the particles. If it's properly fitted, and if the person doesn't have a beard, which is going to inhibit the mask from fitting properly. So, you know, oftentimes people put these masks on and they're not properly fitted, so they're not getting full protection. So that's a concern. We have a Center for Occupational and Environmental Health that will help people to fit them properly, and does instructions and videos so you can see how to do it. EPA also has some good pamphlets on that. But if someone going back into their home where there's likely a lot of off-gassing and VOCs, these masks won't protect them. There are other masks that you can get that will protect against vapor intrusion as well, gas and vapor. They tend to be those larger ones with the discs on the side. So they're harder to sustain and wear for a long period of time. So I guess the answer there is yes, if it's fitted properly, it will stop a lot of the particles, but it won't stop the vapors. So you need to get a specialized mask for that as well.
And again, I think people need to recognize, one of the things I was thinking about today was just trying to relate what does this mean long-term? And maybe you could tell me if my comparison is correct or not, Mike. The after effects of, 9/11 in New York City, when the Twin Towers fell, that wasn't an urban wildfire per se, but it was a lot of building material and ingestion and maybe, Eric, you were, quite involved in the Santa Rosa fire. What did you see as far as residual pollutants and things like that? And what are some of the lessons learned from there that possibly could be applied to what's currently happening down in Los Angeles, if you don't mind?
No problem. For us in Northern California, we saw additional impacts, specifically during cleanup. So when the areas that had been devastated were all the debris was collected and thrown away, that there was additional pollutants that were re-entrained into the air and could have impacts to the public when that's going on. And of particular concern is for folks whose houses may have survived. They go in, they clean up, and then the rest of their neighborhood is cleaned up afterwards, re-entraining a lot of the pollution and then potentially impacting their homes again. So there has to be some sort of strategy and information provided to folks so that they know number one, what's important to measure and realize is in your home after the fire, but how often they may have to do some sort of decontamination work as rebuilding and cleanup occurs in those areas.
And just quickly, Assad, I'm sorry, you've had your hand up for quite a while. Do you have a question?
Yes, hi. Good morning, everybody. I wanted to elaborate and comment more on the prevention side. I'm with the City of Los Angeles for the past 35 years. I'm the senior engineering manager. Also, I'm in the Porter Ranch Neighborhood Council, and I'm active on the EMD, on the Emergency Management Division. So on the prevention, there is three angles to look at. One, the very highly active and always working, which is the nonprofit organizations and groups that always do training, do gift supplies, have annual events so that they educate the people, which stopped when we had the COVID, unfortunately, but prior to the COVID, they were very active. The second venue that we look at in there is the neighborhood councils, who's been active the past 25 years in some CERT training and in getting some groups ready for whatever events we have.
You still there, Assad? Did we lose Assad?
It sounds like it.
Okay. Assad, it seems like we've lost you for the moment. Please, when you can get back to us, this is really important information. Obviously, jump back on as soon as you can. We try to respect people's time and the fact that our world now lives in the world of 30-second TikTok snippets and things like that. We really try to keep this meeting to an hour, just to respect everybody's time. You know, we'll wait as soon as Assad can get back on. We definitely will put him to the front of the list here. But I think the other thing we kind of wanted to, we've been discussing amongst ourselves, is the possibility of actually, you know, I hate to do this in public. I'm going to volunteer. You know, Jochen said that he would be amenable to using his house as a learning center for how the community can, you know, how this will progress. Because again, he is in the middle of this.
Hi, Don. Sorry, my power interrupted and then it rebooted the router.
No problem.
So
Go
which
ahead,
part did
Assad.
I stop? At the neighborhood council, you missed me, or where?
Yeah, right. You were right at talking about how the neighborhood council.
Right. So they trained for CERT, they trained for earthquakes, for a lot of getting people ready. Between the many 99 neighborhood councils, we reached close to 68,000 volunteers ready to go. And then the third portion is the city and the federal and the county, in which they have resources, but limited, a lot of red tape. The prevention is always talked about, but by the time we get to it, sometimes like in this case, it's too late. This fire was expected. The locations and all that, we were expecting there will be fires. However, the magnitude and the wind was not the volume anybody was ready for. And I think moving forward, we really need to enhance and empower more on the nonprofit organizations and on the volunteers, so that we as people are ready to take action and to help our fire department at the same time. We need to deputize everybody to be ready for earthquakes and fire and whatever emergencies. I just wanted to share that with you.
Well, and also, you know, one of the unique opportunities also, and again, I'll just give you my perspective on this. It really, you know, these kind of situations that what the city of Los Angeles is in right now, you know, these things were rare if they ever happen. They're happening more frequently, but I think it's pretty also kind of understood at this point. There isn't a lot of, and maybe both Jochen and Mike and Eric, you guys can comment on this, that there isn't a lot of established research as to what's the correct course of action to go here. So this is kind of a foundational thing. It's and again, I hate to you know, it's a shame that we're in this position, but we got to learn from this. One of the things that we're, you know, again, where we are learning is, you know, what happened at Aliso Canyon and what we did to, and where we are now as a community. It's really important to take the lessons learned there and what's currently happening. For example, with Dr. Jerrett doing his health study there, and the air monitoring network that's currently is in operation there. I mean, these things need to be adjusted, hopefully, to deal with wildfires and the potential health impacts of that. Jan, do you have a quick, because I got again, we only have 15 minutes left. I've got a couple more, hoping very pressing questions I'd like Dr. Jerrett to discuss, but go ahead, Jan.
I was trying to put it in chat, just forget.
Okay, great, because we'll definitely follow up with everybody with anything that's in the chat right now. And Mike, what have you learned from, what can be applied to what you're doing with the health study at Aliso Canyon that could be applied to what you have, what's going on here? And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think, one of the things that Aliso taught us is, we really don't know what's in the mixtures when we have these disasters that are relatively unprecedented. So the pollution that's coming out of either these wildfires or the Aliso facility. It's important to get out there and to measure as much as we possibly can. So we have a baseline so we can know what people might have been exposed to that was health active. And, I think with Aliso, one thing that really tipped the tide in terms of, getting public health on board was showing them that, it wasn't just an outdoor air problem, it was penetrating to the indoor environment. So we were able to go in and do swab tests and show that, in a small number of houses, we were seeing significantly elevated levels of benzene. And that wasn't from the gas itself, it was from all of the probably, still unknown, but the oil droplets that were coming out as the facility depressurized. So you can think of it as a big aerosol hairspray bottle that was blowing out oil droplets. So, nobody else is measuring particles. We saw some interesting things happening when we went out with particle monitoring. You have to get out there and measure as much as you possibly can while it's happening and shortly thereafter. And then to get inside in the houses where people are going to live and try to understand the impacts that have happened in those instances. Once you get to, a year more down the line, you're into really complicated exposure reconstruction. I mean, I can show you some of the things that we're doing on Aliso if you want to see that. But there's no substitute for having that baseline information that comes early and is while the event's happening. So, and then, going forward, we have to be able to tap into health resources. I mean, ideally, we would want to be out there right now, recruiting people to get them into health surveys. There's just a study that was done by my former student. She's now a professor of geography at Colorado's University of Colorado Boulder, Colleen Reed, where they went in 6 months after the Marshall Fire, which was another urban, wildland urban wildfire that destroyed a big neighborhood, and then another 6 months after. I mean, it's a great study, and give them kudos for doing it. But getting in sooner would have been much more accurate, right? Because there's a lot that happens in that ensuing 6 months. And, sometimes when you ask people about their immediate experience, their health effects, they're not going to remember it as well 6 months later. So, unfortunately, I don't see any mechanisms right now with the government to jump in there and do that kind of study. But, that's, I think, important. And then going out longer term, there are a lot of biological assays that we can now do. There's been a real revolution called exposomics, and that really has changed the way that we're able to detect contaminants in people's bloodstreams and other things like saliva. So we can detect thousands of molecules. We can look at perturbations in normal patterns. And those are very good prognostic indicators for future health effects. But again, we need to get in there now and get some of these samples so we have a baseline. And then, once we want to start reconstructing the exposures, let me just share this. We're running out of time. So this is from the Aliso Canyon disaster health study. And we'll look at sort of what are some of the key questions.
Mike, can you actually blow up your screen? It's hard to see.
Yeah, sorry.
There you go.
Okay, so
Beautiful.
in this case, we're trying to sample indoors and outdoors now, but we are doing this now. We have you know, a limited number, like 11 monitors in the field. We just collected our first, we've had to suspend our sampling at LISO because we don't want to get non-representative samples there. We're trying to characterize what's coming out of the facility, but doing indoor outdoor sampling, this isn't relevant to wildfires, but atmospheric models. So we can do that, and we can also use remote sensing satellite imagery to look at the emissions that are coming off of the urban areas that are burned versus the natural ones, because we suspect that it's going to have higher emissions, but we don't know that. So that's one way we can reconstruct that exposure. And really, you know, what we're trying, you know, we could do the exposures from, we could sub in wildfire, adversely affect people's health, the past and currently, do the ongoing emissions. So that's not relevant. And then can we link health outcomes to specific exposures? So these are the sort of health studies that we're doing. So we've got, you know, neonatal blood spots that are collected on every baby in California. We have adverse pregnancy and birth outcomes, and we have our first paper, which should be coming out soon. I expect it'll be accepted. It's been resubmitted to Science Advances, again, excellent journal. And then we've got healthcare utilization data, cancer registry data, and California Health Interview survey data. So we've already used this to look at wildfires in the past and shown that, you know, people are much more likely to miss work after wildfires. So that helps us understand the economic impacts. The healthcare utilization data. Unfortunately, in California, the system's hampered by an administrative structure that seems underfunded, and they can't turn the data around quickly, but we might be able to work with people at health, like Kaiser Permanente, where they have excellent electronic medical records. And the blood spots, that's where we can do this extensive metabolomics. And then Wendy Robbins and David Eisenman and Jesus Araujo have led the development of an in-person health exam and biomarker study for adults, where we're going to be sampling 400 in the Liso Canyon area and 200 in control areas. And then we're doing a survey of physical, mental. So we have all these instruments are ready to go. We just need to have the resources to deploy them, really. And, you know, one of the things that's a big change in epidemiology now is looking at these sort of, they're called quasi-experimental designs, where you're trying to look at something that replicates a randomized trial. So this group got heavily exposed, this group didn't. And how does their health differ? So, and for that, we're using, you know, satellite imagery, so we can look at the plume that came off of Aliso and see how far it goes. We're now seeing that, you know, on some days it went well beyond that sort of 8 kilometer bound and was, you know, out to 18 kilometers. And then, you know, when we had the winds going the other direction, we can see that it's not really affecting populated areas. So, you know, looking at different impact zones, so we have to define these. And this is what we've defined for Aliso as control areas and then the impact zones. So these are things that we could do for the wildfire, and then start comparing some of those health outcomes. And then I'll just quickly show you, you know, where there are pregnant women that were exposed to the disaster experienced more adverse birth outcomes than expected. And this is led by Kimberly Paul and Beata Ritz. And, you know, when we look at the adverse birth outcomes, we do have excellent birth records in California. There's a lag on getting them. So that's something that, you know, if the governor's office wanted to, they could ask these agencies to speed up the delivery of the health data so we could get to that. So we took different bands of exposure impacts, and then we looked at, you know, we're trying to look at periods prior to the disaster, during the disaster, and then potentially afterwards. And what we're trying to do here is, here's a control group, and they're following a certain pattern. If we make some reasonable assumptions that the impact zone without the disaster should have followed the same pattern. We're looking at these differences in the outcomes, but we might actually see something that looks more like this, and that's what we have observed. So during the Aliso disaster and shortly thereafter, we start to see this increase in adverse birth outcomes. And that gives us pretty compelling evidence that it was a result of this disaster, not the result of something else, because we're comparing it to control groups that are very similar. And that's the sort of impact estimate. And this gets kind of technical, but this is just overlapping periods of mothers with their babies, 9-month period. So anybody that overlaps with the disaster period. And this is what we actually see. So this is for low birth weight babies. We can see that there's this big spike that happens shortly after the disaster starts, and then it flattens out and goes back to normal afterwards. So I know we're almost out of time. So, but that's just some of the approaches that we could apply in this instance. But these are complicated studies, and there's going to have to be some funding, and it has to come quickly, I think, if we're going to especially get the baseline measurements.
Wow. Thank you.
Yeah, and
Sorry, that was a lot in very little time. I'm happy to respond and rejoinders afterwards.
well, and I want to just quickly note that, like I said, this meeting has been going on. We meet every Thursday, 8 a.m. We've been doing this for years now. I think this is an excellent forum to, help educate the public as to, lessons learned from the, Santa Rosa, the past, the fire that Eric dealt with, what happened at Aliso Canyon, and, the structure of how the health assessment is done there, as well as the monitoring equipment that is currently applied there. Whether or not it is directly usable or adds value to assessing health impact of a urban wildfire, that's one of the things we want to address. But one of the beauties of the way the Porter Ranch air monitoring network is set up, it's expandable and can easily incorporate other technologies that might be more amenable for detecting things like urban wildfire smoke or the health impacts of it. We definitely want to keep this going in these topics, and I hope that especially our experts will come back and periodically, let us know as a community of very interested people, what they're doing and what they're seeing, and hopefully this can, be a benefit for wider spread, knowledge of what it's going to ultimately take to, deal with the long-term health impacts. First measure it and then deal with it. As I was mentioning, we are hoping, if Jochen is amenable to it, that we can use his current situation in the air monitoring and how the, Jochen he's not allowed back in his home right now. This is
Yeah, and I think if I
not
can,
good.
if I can interrupt you, Don, for 1 second, because
Please
Marilyn
do.
actually asked a question, and I'm assuming that's why she has her hand up.
Sure.
Thank you.
It would be great to get in there right now, right, and start doing these measurements. One challenge is if you install it beforehand, most of these areas have no power, have no internet, nothing. So, even if you have a monitoring system in there, it's not going to work, right?
Oh,
You can build it that way, right? You could build it resilient to things like that. But it would be really good to, you have these samplers, you could do that. But the issue right now is also I don't know that we have a lot of experience in getting air monitoring into these things right now, because a lot of these areas are classified as hazardous, and that's going to be one of the main challenges. And I think maybe in the long term, the fire brigade or whoever is actually comfortable getting into these areas should have more monitoring in their arsenal. But I mean, what we really would like to do is like said, is just measuring hydrocarbons, take samples of particles that can be analyzed afterwards for what's actually on them and so on. I mean, there is modern technology that can do it. It's just very expensive to deploy and buy. So I've been talking to colleagues and see if somebody wants to start measuring as soon as anybody's allowed in there, and they're thinking about it.
But again, just an alternate perspective on this, I guess, is, the issue with power is always a huge issue. But we've actually got some examples where, even some data is better than no data. And, we've designed a number of these places to have enough backup power to at least grab some data before, batteries go away. But, for example, we're actually, we're doing air monitoring out in Colorado right now at where they're drilling for natural gas. And, those systems are basically all solar powered based. I mean, obviously there's no golden answer that solves all problems. But I think what Mike is trying to imply is that as much data, high quality data as we can get, as early as we can get, is certainly going to help him, I think, in assessing, long-term health impacts, which ultimately, I think that's the big worry here is the property damage is immense, and it's sad and terrible, but it's really, how this is going to impact community health. That's the long-term really concerning.
I thought I'd share this because we just pulled the filters that were deployed at my house in Venice. This is the indoor filter. So this is a particle monitor that's pulling through a pump, pulls the air over top of a filter. And this is the outdoor. This is the past week. So, this is another thing that we need to find ways to get more people, HEPA filters but even just, this wasn't the early part. I did not put a HEPA filter in this room. I had one running in the main part of the house, but you can see staying indoors is going to help quite a bit. But we were pretty shocked when we saw the magnitude. We haven't done any chemical analysis on this yet, but these can be run off solar. They're small, compact monitors. So I agree. If we want to get in there with the really good instruments that Jochen is talking about, we are going to need power, but there are some things that we could do now. And this is consistent. We've seen it in other more distal places like Culver City. So we'll see what we get. Hopefully we get the labs to move quickly on these analysis.
And again, Erica, just let me quickly comment that, I'm hoping Mike and Jochen and everybody else, as you guys learn and get results, hopefully you'll be willing to share with this group. This is an amazing group of people who are really have a great commitment towards understanding air quality and how air pollution impacts people. And this information is just invaluable to these guys. And if you need, if you want to get the word out about low-cost samplers that can be deployed places, I guarantee you this is a wonderful venue to get very active participants in doing those kind of things. Eric, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, one of the points I wanted to make was how time is important in this exercise. one of the things that's kind of critical is knowing what the concentrations are after the fire. And then as cleanup progresses, how that, hopefully decreases those concentrations over time so that, the public knows that cleanup is successful and that areas are now safe to go in. So not only is it a matter of, ensuring that folks aren't exposed, but it's also critical to be able to show, progress over time, that things are improving, getting better, and that activities aren't causing additional exposures.
So maybe in the near future, we can do again, there's a lot to take in today's meeting. I'd really like to, Marilyn, do you have a comment or?
Well, I certainly am grateful for this because it was put together on short notice, but I think we need to continue this, and we will be holding a forum at the end of February on February 27th, and everyone will be invited. And central to our concerns will be talking about health impacts from wildfires and urban other sources of industrial and urban pollution, as we in communities care about our own wherever we are, and those of us in refinery communities know why we've initiated our nonprofit. But I really appreciated the comment that was made, I believe, by Assad, that we need to empower nonprofits and be deputized in a way, whatever that means, to government. That we are a parallel, we're not a distant universe. We are on the ground working, and we can do things to push government to do the very kinds of things that you are talking about in academia that are helpful to us, because we have the passion to do it. And so that's what I have a hope for BCamp, that we can at least perform this in the near future, to gather expertise, et cetera, that we can share with the communities that we're involved with. So I'm very grateful today, and thank you so much, Argos and Eric with Argos, and Jochen, and Mike, and I hope we get to know you better. Thank you.
I just want to mention to everybody that the Coalition for Clean Air had a webinar yesterday on wildfires and health effects, and I wasn't able to watch the whole thing because it went on for several hours, but it was I think quite informative, so worth having a look when they post that, which hopefully will be soon. A lot of interest. They had 8,000 people on the webinar.
Whoa.
And again, what we're going to do is obviously post this recording, but also we've also got a slew of very informative, thanks to Dr. Jerrett and Jochen, really good information on urban wildfire and how it impacts communities. We'll make all of that information available for anybody, obviously, who wants it. And again, I guess I really want to end it by just wishing all of the people down in Los Angeles the best. They're literally, we'll do whatever we can to support you guys, and Jochen, good luck. This is obviously a really bad situation, and you guys you're in our thoughts without a doubt.
Yes.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
So with that, I guess we'll
Don.
kind of close this out. We're a bit over time, but that's never a problem. I mean, it just shows how interested everybody is. We're just at the start of this process. And definitely I want to thank you guys for attending today. I mean, this is so helpful for like I said, people who are really, really interested in air quality and how it impacts communities. So with that, I'll let everybody go. Good luck down there today. And if you guys need any help, you know where to get hold of us.
All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Don. Thank you,
so
everybody.
much.
Thanks, everyone.
Take
Appreciate
care.
it.
Bye-bye.
Hey, Eric.